Welcome to the Fiber Optic Center's Jazz Podcast Series with your host, Dave Reis, one of the area's foremost authorities on the South Coast jazz scene from the post-World War II years to today. The South Coast Artists Index thanks the Fiber Optic Center for their continued support of the arts on the South Coast and underwriting this 10-part jazz podcast series. Your host, Dave Reis, will help preserve the memory and legacy of the jazz artists coming to and from the South Coast and how they helped to shape what jazz is today. And now, Dave Reis.
Hello, I'm Dave Reis, the jazz host for South Coast Artists Index. And we get a guest here today. My last podcast, I didn't have a guest, but podcast was about the wall on Center Street, the beautiful wall. Done by Kat Knutson. Last time I was so worried about saying her last name that I said Kate Knutson. I was worried about the last name and messed up on the first name. Well, on that, the theme on that was I introduced you to the fellas on the wall. I talked about them and played different tunes that they were on. But today, we have the guy that owns the wall, Neal Weiss, owner of Fiber Optics and Wayland City Sound. Neal, welcome.
Thank you very much. I don't know that I own the wall. I own the wall, but the mural is that belongs to the city.
I was careful. I said the wall.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Dave. It's always great to spend time with you.
Yeah.
We do that pretty regularly, which is a wonderful thing.
They might have to kick us out. We get started. In fact,
that's right. We tell the same stories over and over.
Right, exactly. And besides Fiber Optics, Neal owns the Wayland City Sound.
I actually don't own Fiber Optic Center anymore.
Well, yeah, I know. The family does.
But I still work there part-time.
Yeah, part-time traveling all over the world.
That's right. It's been a great, it's going to be 25 years next year, I think, for Wayland City Sound. Started on a New Year's Eve. I guess it was, I'm not sure whether it was 99, 2000. I think it might have been 98, 99. And John Harrison and Marcel Gauvin were performing at the Whaling Museum as part of First Night. And one of the things that we do, the building on Center Street has a wonderful deck up on the 5th floor. And when there are fireworks over the harbor on New Year's Eve, we always have a party. It seems like if you have a space like that where you're right almost under the fireworks, you're obligated. That's how I feel, to get people together and have some fun. So a bunch of people were up there, different people that I knew, work people, others. And after midnight, after the fireworks, everyone cleared out, except for John Harrison and Marcel. And Lori, I think her name is Steiger now. Her name at that time was Lori Carlson. She was an artist, and she designed the CD, the drawing of the first CD I ever put out, Marcel's Faces of Love, and then also did the cover drawing on John Harrison's it was CD number 8 called Roman's Son. But anyway, the four of us were up there, and those are back in my drinking days. That was a while ago. I said, okay, now we're going to open the champagne because pretty much everyone had left. There were four of us still there. And the ladies, Marcel and Lori, said, oh, no, put it away. And they each opened their pocketbook and pulled out bottles of tequila. No. And that happened to be my potion of choice in those days. Uh-huh. And I think they knew that. Anyway, we proceeded to celebrate the new year and discuss forming a label. At the time, the fiber optic business was doing very, very well. We were heading for a crash, which I didn't know about at the time. Mm-hmm. But I thought I had enough disposable income that I could indulge myself and start a jazz label. My original thinking was that people like John Harrison and Marcel were world-class or pretty darn close, and yet I couldn't really find them very easily on CD. I couldn't have them. Mm-hmm. The only time I could hear them was to go hear them in person, and that was few and far between, at least at times. Anyway, so we agreed that the first CD that night would be Marcel. John would produce it. And then shortly after, we would produce a John Harrison CD. And those remain, that's number 1 and number 8, really among my favorites. There's a story behind every single CD, but they hold up very well. Marcel's CD still sounds great. Mike Monaghan
Right.
showed up with a 5-minute notice in the studio and proceeded to knock out just about every single solo on the CD without ever having to redo anything. There were 1 or 2 where he said, "Oh, I think I could do a little better." But just in about a half hour, every single solo was put on that.
It is a
that
great CD. I still play it.
And John Harrison's, again, also.
Yes.
A story there is we recorded that CD, and afterward I was talking to John about mixing and editing and that, and there was something, he was started talking about the next CD, and I hung up the phone and I thought, well, hold it a second, we haven't even put this one out? And he's thinking about the next one. Something's not right here. So I called him back and I said, is there an issue? And he admitted that it just didn't seem to come together. The music didn't gel, which is always a possibility in the studio. You're paying musicians, you're paying for time.
Right.
You don't know if what you're going to get is up to the standard that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I was a little extreme in those days. It turned out it had to do with the drummer. It just didn't quite click, and that gentleman actually, it was the beginning of a long illness. He became very ill, became kind of a hermit, and I don't even know what he had. I think it might have been related to alcohol, but he had some medical issues. And but what we did was we flew Alan Hall in from Berkeley, California, to redo the CD. So the CD that came out was Peter Katrimas, Alan Hall, and John Harrison. So that was the beginning of it, and we had a string. We started out with jewel cases, which I can't stand. Those are the plastic cases. I generally break the cover trying to open the thing, trying to get the plastic off, the cellophane, whatever it's called these days. Anyway, continued on and worked with some great musicians. And then over time, actually, I've managed to work with people who are my idols, my heroes growing up. My love of jazz started at about junior high or a little bit older, early high school. My older brother was an early doo-wopper, bought 78s by Elvis and Duane Eddy and the Moonglows and the Olympics.
Moonglows was one of my favorites. Moonglows. Yeah, I bought everything they did R&B.
And then, and also got into jazz. We grew up in New York and listening to Symphony Sid at night. So he came on, I don't know if it was at midnight, I can't even remember now what, 10?
It was late.
Late.
I think it was 10, around 10.
So I would stay up late under the covers at home and listen to jazz. But one of the first things that grabbed me was Monin,
Oh, yes.
Art Blakey, and again, unbelievable band.
Benny Golson.
Lee Morgan,
Wow.
Bobby Timmons. These names are ingrained.
Yeah, Bobby Timmons wrote Monin.
I'm sorry.
He wrote it,
Right. He was a great writer. Wrote a lot of great things. And that's the way what Blakey did. He would get these young guys and make them music directors.
Exactly.
And they would compose. I mean, Wayne Shorter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's forever.
Yeah.
But over time, you know, the people that I would say worshipped, I actually got to meet them and put out CDs. And the particular ones the three that really stand out to me that I really loved, one was Terry Gibbs. And I have a couple of CDs of his music, 3 actually. Mm-hmm. 2 of them he's on in one way or another. And then I'll talk about it a little later, have another one in the works. Another one was Clark Terry. And again, I would buy anything that had Clark Terry on it. Very distinctive sound, as you know. So you could have in those days, a pop singer like Steve Lawrence, Edie Gourmet, someone like that, who was not particularly known in the jazz world, or they were, but they were considered more pop. But there would be a solo on one of their songs,
Right.
some of them, and it was Clark Terry, and he's so distinctive. So I would buy those albums just to hear.
Are you talking about the Sean Montero album?
Yeah. So,
well, that proved your point. You said John Harris could play anybody. He was on that gig with Jimmy Cobb on drums, Clark Terry on trumpet. So it shows you John could play with.
Jimmy Woody was on
Jimmy
bass.
Woody was on bass.
That's
Sean's dad. Yeah.
Who
Duke Ellington's bass
with
player.
Ellington, right.
For years. So John played with them, and he was right in there.
And he was
piano
the music director of that night.
Exactly. So that shows you were right about him.
So anyway, Sean put together a couple of nights at Scullers, and we talked about recording it, and we did record those 2 nights, and it became a CD called One Special Night. You know, we combined the tracks that we could use.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I tried to do, so I have some Clark Terry, but he also told stories that night, and we'll include in this this show. We'll include some of his talking. We'll get to hear some of that, and I think it's a little bit unusual, but I tried on some CDs very selectively to include some talking by the artist. Now, it's a tough thing because sometimes my feeling is that I'm so old school that I believe in putting it on and listening to the whole CD. Generally, younger people now, everything's on their phone, and it's pop artists with hits. So they listen to a song.
They listen to tracks, not the whole
tracks.
CD. Yes, not the whole CD.
But I'm a believer. I put something on and I want to listen to it. But if it's talking, the music, you can hear 100 times if you like the music. But if it's talking, it gets tiresome. So it became kind of a problem to me. Do I put the talking in, all this talking, or leave it out? So what I did in some cases is I put it at the end of the side. I took the talking out of the space between the songs, and I put them at the end. And others, I kept the story in and tried to make the evening a flow. So the Sean CD, One Special Night, I feel very strongly has an arc to it, where at the beginning she introduces the band and talks about how special the night is to be with her dad, and Clark Terry is her godfather. And of course, Jimmy Cobb, I think, was the last surviving member of the famous kind of blue Miles Davis session. He's legendary, in addition to being a fantastic drummer. Anyway, so Clark told some stories that night.
I know.
And we included them. So we'll get one of those on this for you. And the other one, I got to work pretty closely for a few years with Joe Beck, guitarist, who at a very young age became very successful. And he admits it, in a way it went to his head. He was so, he was still a teenager, I think, when he recorded with Miles, or shortly after. And so we did something that, he passed away from lung cancer, and he had been sick and had a bit of a remission for a while, and he recorded a live recording on the West Coast, which we put out after he passed away. He passed away shortly after that. But he also told some stories. And that one, we kept them short, typically less than a minute. And we put those in between tracks.
I have this opportunity to play a couple of ballads since we're recording. So ordinarily I would be doing kind of music that makes you drink more. I'm sorry about that. You just have to motivate yourself on your own, on the drinking.
Another story you mentioned, you and I have stories for Joe Beck, when he was you had him at the Narrows, and I was the MC.
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't have too big of a crowd, so I apologized. I'm sorry, Joe, there's not much of a crowd here tonight. He said, Dave, I travel all over the country. This is one of the biggest crowd. People that just aren't coming out,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. And as a matter of fact, that CD, live CD, is called Get Me Joe Beck. And the joke he tells, it's from a joke that he tells. He says, what are the 4 stages of a jazz musician's career? And he says, the first one is, let me think, is oh, gee, I should have prepared for this.
No, we're just talking, man.
Yeah. He says, get me Joe Beck. And then next one is, who's Joe Beck? Then first one is, who's Joe Beck? Then it's, get me Joe Beck. Then it's, get me someone who sounds like Joe Beck. And then finally, who's Joe Beck? You know, that you go from being the desired person to them wanting to copy so they don't have to pay you.
Yeah. Well, there's a story about him on that Miles CD record. Did you say it was a record at that time? They didn't tell Miles, the producer, that he was going to have a guitar player. And then when they came in the studio, Joe Beck was there, and Miles went to the company and said, I don't want that producer ever again. He didn't ask me if I wanted a guitar player.
Yeah.
Miles was a character.
He was the
too.
first guitar player. And the next one was George Benson, I think, on Miles in the Sky.
Yeah, I believe it was Benson. Yes, very good.
I love that record.
Benson was a good player, too.
Anyway, so there's a little bit of Joe Beck telling stories about living in New York, and he was roomed with Antonio Carlos Jobim, or in the same building or something. Yeah. So he tells stories about that.
Most of those buildings, like Joe and Paul, there were 4 or 5 guys to an apartment. You know, they were to pay the rent.
Actually, there's
the buildings were full of musicians.
It's still happening. I'm aware of.
Oh, is that right?
One of the musicians I work with is living in New Jersey. I don't remember if it was Hackensack, but right next to the city. And with younger musicians, generally. He's a little older. But.
Sam Jones and Mose Allison shared the apartment right next to Joe and Paul's, and Earl Warren. Joe, Paul, and Earl Warren had an apartment, then Paul left. And then right next was Sam Jones and Mose Allison. All, there wasn't one guy to one apartment.
Right. And then the other one that I brought the talking about is Phil Woods, who performed at Chan's in Woonsocket with Greg Abate. And that was, excuse me, that was interesting.
It was.
Greg was really a devotee of Phil Woods. Phil was a big influence. But again, Phil Woods, if he was on a CD, or in those days, records. If he was on a record, I would buy it. That was,
me too. Tons of them.
And he was in a million bands. He played with a lot of different people. Quincy Jones' big band, both Clark and Phil Woods together. But Greg said he had an opportunity he had recorded with Phil Woods once or twice before, at least once, maybe there were 2. And he asked if I wanted to do this, and he got a commitment from Phil. He was very reasonable, I thought, on the money. Looking back, it's a different story. But and again, a little backstory on that. I was talking to Phil on the phone. I hadn't met him, and I was suggesting different songs that he might do, and he pretty much, I would say, thought I was an idiot. I would suggest songs, and he'd give me reasons why they were a bad idea. And finally, the night of the gig, he was having supper there with his wife at Chan's, and I sat down with him, and we started talking about different songs. And again, he was very dismissive. One of the songs I wanted him to do is I Mean You, the Monk tune, because this recording was just about 50 years to the day, almost, a few months apart, but from the big band and quartet in concert, Thelonious Monk, a very famous album in those days, and it became a 2 CD set. There was arrangements of Monk tunes with a big band, and then he also had his quartet,
yes,
Charlie Rouse. And he did I Mean You. So I thought, it would be really nice, 50 years later, small group, have do that. And he said, Phil said, nah, I'm not going to do that. That requires work. I have to work on that. We're just going to have fun. And I said, Misty, how about Misty? I like that song. He was very dismissive. He's, man, what do you, And then he said, maybe I'll do In Your Own Sweet Way. Dave Brubeck had just passed away. He said, that would be very fitting. It's a good tune. And I said to him, you recorded that on an Eddie Costa album with Art Farmer, and I don't remember exactly who the others were on it. And he just looked up at me and he said, you know Eddie Costa? And I happened to be a big Eddie Costa fan. He was relatively unknown. He was a musician's musician.
Yeah, he was on some things with Clark Terry.
Clark Terry has some great stuff on the Eddie Costa Memorial album.
Right. I love that. Yep. Coleman Hawkins on that. Different guy. Yeah.
So anyway, that changed everything. Because I knew Eddie Costa, I wasn't quite the idiot that I had been a minute earlier. But anyway, Phil told stories during these nights of recording at Chan's. And again, rather than put them in the middle, because some of those are a little long, not real long, but they come it's a 2 CD set. At the end of each CD, one of them has, I think, maybe one story or two, and the other has 2 or 3.
We'd like to do a Thelonious, thank you. A Thelonious Monk, I'd like to tell you a story about this one too. I know all these stories. I was on a record date once with Thelonious Monk, and we had played, it was my date, and it was one of the few dates that he played on as a sideman. He was very, very particular about not playing on dates with other people. So I was fortunate enough to have him on the date with me as a sideman. So we did many tunes, most of them were my tunes, and so it dawned on me suddenly, we had not done any Thelonious Sphere Monk tunes. So I walked over to him and says, hey, T, we have done all these tunes, we haven't done any of your tunes, so I said, what should we do? So he says, go to man! So I thought he was telling me to get the hell away from him, So I ran, so he said, no, come on back, we're gonna play this. And what he was actually saying to me is, let's cool one, man. So, which is the title of this tune, Let's Cool One. But I had never heard it. I said, well, how does it go? He said, just listen, you'll hear it. So, what happened? 1, 2, 1, 2.
That night at Chan's, he took a solo and he did a phrase for Monk and pointed at you.
That's right. That was at the very beginning. I think it was a Sleeping Bee.
Yeah.
And he was doing his solo, and he ended his solo. And what's interesting about it, if you know the song, is Tim Ray soloed right after that, and Tim picked up on that line. Yeah. He continued playing that song. So I always get a kick out of that.
I got a kick out of it.
We were sitting right in front. Right in front. And he pointed right at us.
Yeah, he played a phrase of Monk.
and Phil was very sick at the time.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, one of the things we included, the spoken thing, whereas he started telling jokes about his oxygen. He was on oxygen, and the oxygen company or the unit that he had was called Sequel. And he used to in the 50s, he had a band with Gene Quill, 2 alto players, Phil and Quill. So his joke at the time is, used to be Phil and Quill, now it's Phil and Sequel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he's very quick, a very smart man.
Yeah.
Greg got tired after something. After one song, he was breathing hard or something. Greg works real hard.
Yeah.
And Phil offered him the oxygen.
Yeah.
And he says, you want a hit? And he says, the first one is free.
I apologize. I said it before, like playing a lot, the notes, it ruins, the pressure makes your brain work weird when you're blowing into the instrument. So I forget a lot of stuff. I apologize, but...
You want a hit? The first one's free.
We're going to have some fun the next couple of days, yeah. Yeah, we're going to continue. We're going to do this ballad on the first set, but Phil wanted to take a break. We're going to do Moonlight in Vermont.
This is a true story. When I was 14 years old, and I've been playing the saxophone for a couple of years, and I heard this song, Moonlight in Vermont. So in my room, in bright silver, I did a musical staff, all curly-cued and stuff, and I put the last 4 bars of Moonlight in Vermont up there. Da, 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 da. I thought that was the hippest shit I ever heard, you know. And my father said, what is that? And I sang it to him, and he said, oh, that's not bad. true story, true story. All right, let's try to play this sucker.
Well, he also said, I'm tired now. I'm going to have to lay out and save some oxygen. And Greg will play a ballad for you. Greg, do you know how to play ballads?
yeah, no, that's, and then also in that exchange, and again, I think it's on the CD, but you have to have a little background, I guess, to get it. It might be an inside joke, but he says, Greg's going to play a ballad for you. I need to rest. And Greg says, no, you're going to join me. We're both going to play. And Phil goes, not going to happen.
Yep, I remember that.
Shut it down.
Yeah. But that was a good evening. Yeah,
but anyway, so the idea that is these people have passed away. They're all gone. Clark and Phil Woods, and Joe Beck also passed away. But I have not only some music of theirs preserved, but also the speaking.
Yes.
And again, the point: why did you do that? Why bother? Because I want people to get a sense of who the person was, if possible. Again, if it didn't fit, if it was inappropriate, that's different. But if I can splice in a few lines from these people, because they were all very funny, very funny men.
Yeah.
So that's.
Oh yeah, they were funny.
Yeah. And then the other one of my heroes that I'm still talking to is Terry Gibbs.
Oh yeah.
Who will be 100 in mid-October, coming up on his 100th birthday. He's had a little scare recently. He was not feeling well for a couple of weeks, but recovering very much so. Still a very, very strong personality. Really has very strong ideas. And what both of us are excited about right now is that he found some recordings that he didn't know about of what's called the Terry Gibbs Dream Band.
Yes.
Around 1959, he had a big band, and it was in L.A., and it was all the guys who would go out tour with Sinatra. And I would call them, I guess, studio guys.
Studio guys, yeah.
But Conti Candoli, so those Pete Jolly, they were more than just
studio guys.
They performed all around the LA.
They were jazz musicians.
Yes, all over the world, really. It was an all-star band.
Yes.
And so there are 6 CDs out. There were a few albums, some studio, some live, but there already exists Terry Gibbs Dream Band Volume 1 through 6.
Yeah, I have a few of them.
Yeah, I had asked him if there was any stuff of the Dream Band that was unreleased, and he always said, no, the stuff that's out there is all the good stuff has been, anything that's releasable is out there. But all of a sudden, Jerry was home with him last holiday season. Jerry Gibbs, his son, who I work closely with.
Right.
Dropping names
performed here in New Bedford for you. You've had him here in New Bedford.
Yeah, everyone should know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jerry went home and they were going through stuff, and they found some of the Dream Band recordings that were never released, and they were from the same week, the same band, same engineer as the stuff that's out there. And Terry was floored at the quality of the recording, at the playing. So we are now putting together probably a GoFundMe to release this in October in conjunction with his 100th birthday.
Stuff. Yeah. As I told you before, the first 3 jazz records I bought was Terry Gibbs was one because I loved the vibes. Milt Jackson was my favorite. Perspirado and Dave Brubeck. I bought Perspirado because Michael Joe was on the album, and Dave Brubeck. And those are the first 3. Terry Gibbs.
Which Brubeck?
At a college?
Jazz Goes to College?
Yes.
That was one of the first big selling jazz records.
That's why I bought it. I didn't know much, but I saw that was a big selling record, and I bought it. And Terry Gibbs, I liked. But you talk about that Dream Band. It was such a good band. Those guys were such good musicians. Towards the end, when Terry couldn't afford to pay them, they were playing because it was fun.
Yeah.
They were their Monday night Monday night.
Off night.
So they were having a good time. So that's why the band kept going for a while on those live shows.
True.
Outstanding players on that.
So we will put a little music on here. And the song that I picked out to include is a version of with that band of Sweet Georgia Brown. And this is a record. When I had this record, it was on Verve, and I think it was called The Exciting Terry Gibbs, maybe Dream Band or Big Band, Terry Gibbs Big Band. But in those days, I think you had this also, the vinyl, if you played it too much, you wore it out.
Oh,
It would
yes.
start scratching,
Yeah.
it would sound bad. You
Yeah.
have to rebuy records.
So exactly.
Typically,
Yeah.
CDs, unless you abuse them,
Yeah.
that doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
If you drop it and step on it or something, maybe. But yeah, this was that live Verve Terry Gibbs.
Yeah. Well, like
One
you,
that I had to buy more than once.
Like you're saying about Terry Gibbs, not too long ago we were talking about Terry Gibbs, so I went out, dug out that album. I can't play it. The one I said was one of my first albums.
Really? Oh.
I put it on. There's no way,
Album.
all scratched up and everything. Yeah, but anyway.
So, and then related to the Dream Band, I'd say maybe 5 years ago, Jerry Gibbs, his son, was living in New York. And one of the things about the Dream Band is that all of the arrangers out there who were making a living by writing music for The Tonight Show and movie scores and, you had composers like Johnny Mandel and others writing music, and then they would have to get it arranged. And the best arrangers at the time were living out there, and they loved this band, so they would contribute arrangements. Bill Holman,
Right.
Marty Page, Al Cohn, very heavy hitters in the world of arranging.
That's what they said. They loved that band. That's why they try to keep it playing, keep it going. They played for nothing.
One of the things that Terry points out about this band and this music is that it's not so much about the soloists. The solos are short. They're great soloists.
Yeah.
It's not to feature solo. It's not long tracks. It's a lot of writing, a lot of
Right.
the whole
A lot of
band.
contributions. Yeah.
Anyway, Jerry, the arrangements haven't been shared that much. There have been times when people played these arrangements, but Jerry put together 4 nights at Dizzy's in New York, an all-star big band of New York players, and 4 nights in a row, 2 shows a night. And my wife and I actually went down to New York and stayed for this time. And I went to all 8 shows. My wife went to the first show, the first night, and the first show on the last night.
Yeah.
In the meantime, she went to the symphony, she went to
Right.
opera.
But you were hooked. You were hooked.
I was there for each one. What was interesting is they were reading the charts. So even though they were the best players in New York, they struggled because the music is not simple. And my reaction to this was that I listened to them learn the music over the 4 nights. It was 8 shows. By the last night, they were killing it. They were nailing it. And they struggled. And since Terry wasn't there, Terry was the major soloist in the band. Each night they had a different soloist. So one night it was Nicholas Payton. One night, Eric Alexander.
One of my favorites.
One night, Paquito de Rivera. And one night, Tom Harrell. So they were the featured singers each night,
Nice.
one each night. And generally, Jerry Gibbs is someone who likes to hang in the musician world.
Right.
That's not uncommon.
Right.
So after, they would finish up maybe 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And we would just hang out backstage or in one of the back rooms, sometimes for hours. The guys would, Lou Soloff was in the band, so one night we hung with him, and he was telling stories about playing at Woodstock with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and he did the solo on Spinning Wheel. Ironically, at this gig at Dizzy's, Jerry was talking about that solo and who he was, and he said, how many of you know Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Spinning Wheel? And there was silence in the audience. And I think a lot of it, some of it is age maybe, but a lot of the jazz audience in New York is really tourists.
Yes, yes.
They think when you go to New York, you
Yes.
should go to a jazz club.
It's true.
So they're not really knowledgeable.
Right.
Now, there's nothing against tourism, and the fact is they employ our friends,
Right, right.
the musicians we love, make a living because of that.
Yeah.
But it's surprising that the audience is not necessarily familiar with the people.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, it's my passion to give the information about jazz, because I've had a lot of friends, they just went to jazz, they liked it, you know, but it was an event to go to. You know,
Yeah,
they didn't know anything about the guy that was playing, what he did, who he played with before. So that's my passion, to spread that out. When I was on radio, I always give some information about the guys, give them some respect.
I have the strong memory of hearing your first show on SMU. It was at that time, it became WUSM.
Right.
The first day, I thought, boy, this guy knows his stuff.
Yeah, that's been my passion.
I also heard, if not Eric Jackson's first show, I remember when he came on the air.
Yes.
At WBCN, I think, originally.
Right.
And then he went to GBH.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, WBCN is one of the reasons why the station changed at UMass Dartmouth. They couldn't come into this area. So we moved over.
I see.
It was because of BCN. Yeah. But yeah, we could go on forever with all these stories, and I really love it. But how about some of the new stuff you're doing? We got something on charts. Right?
Right now, we're in good shape. We have the number 9 CD is Peter Hand, Blue Topaz. Peter is a guitarist from New York who is married to a wonderful woman from New Bedford.
Yes.
The Blake family, into a big family.
Yeah.
His wife is Roz.
Roz.
And Peter I've known for a few years. We talked about maybe doing something together. Very talented composer, arranger, and guitarist. He's done a couple of big band CDs. I remember saying to him, his big band CD was going up the radio chart, Jazz Week radio chart, very fast. And at the time, I had the number 1 CD with Jerry Gibbs. And I remember saying to him, boy, if you knock us out of number 1, I'm going to be really upset. And sure enough, he bumped us. We went to number 2, and his big band CD went to number 1. But anyway, that's doing very well. And then right behind it, tied in a 4-way tie for number 10, right behind it on the chart, it is Greg Murphy.
Greg Murphy, right.
A CD called You Remind Me, which is a very touching tribute to his wife who passed away relatively recently, within the last year. And he put together a CD of, her name was Nancy, and a long version of the ballad Nancy with the Laughing Face, which was written about Nancy Sinatra.
Right.
It was written for Frank Sinatra.
Right, that's true. Yep.
Do you remember who the writer was?
No, but I just remember the Sinatra story.
Okay.
My aunt, I was quick to say get away, but my aunt, she was a fan of Frank Sinatra. She was a teenager and everything. And in her house, she had all the men in the family's picture and Frank Sinatra's. So her son always said, "There's Uncle Frank up on the wall."
You've been listening to the South Coast Artists Index Jazz Podcast Series, graciously underwritten by the Fiber Optic Center, helping make the best cable assemblies in the world. Located in New Bedford, Massachusetts, the Fiber Optic Center also sponsored the Jazz Mural in the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. For more information, visit them at focenter.com. And now, back to the Fiber Optic Center's Jazz Podcast Series with your host, Dave Reis.
So that's what's happening. And then the latest is Fernando Huergo, an electric bass player who teaches at Berkeley and at Tufts, who I've loved for many, many years. I don't have him on much. The only thing I can think of is there's a Marcus Montero CD, and I can't even think of the name now, but Marcus plays a kind of a funk, and I put out a CD many, many years ago. It's maybe number 32 or so. That was his, I think I used to call it fractured funk. It has an edge to it, but it's very funky. But we started talking, and I said, look, I'd like to do a jazz CD, not your funk stuff. And he agreed to do it, and we had Fernando Huergo and Steve Langone with the rhythm section, and John Harrison on piano. So that CD didn't do a lot at the time in terms of, screaming up the charts. But if you go back and listen to it one track at a time, it's terrific. It's, in terms of listening to it all the way through, I like it, but I think I don't know.
You know what I like? Your Wayland City sound. Innovative music, impeccable sound. I like that.
That's our slogan, and again,
Yeah.
I say I want our music, our CDs. There are 4 areas that I want them to be as good as anything out there. One is composition. You know, a lot of jazz artists, they want to write originals, and then so the battle is: do you do originals or do you do standards, either jazz
Right.
standards or from what's called
Yeah.
the American Songbook?
Yeah.
And some of them just are not that good writers. You know,
Right,
there's a reason
right.
why something is a standard.
Right.
To me, the definition of a standard is someone else plays the song,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
not just the person who wrote
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So the reason that you hear the same songs over and over, Stella by Starlight, Stardust,
Green Dolphin Street.
yeah, Green Dolphin Street, is because they're great songs.
Yes.
So the compositions have to be top notch.
Well, Bird and those guys, when they started Bop, those were standard songs. That, you know, they didn't have a lot of compositions, and they'd use the chord changes of standard songs and improvise on that. Yeah, that's what's up.
Contrafact. I
Right.
learned that from Greg Abate.
Yes.
So the compositions, the performance, the playing needs to be top notch. The recording itself, and this is a tough one because you go in. First of all, there's different opinions about the sound of the recording. So when it comes time to finishing it up, you have to listen to it over and over and decide if you can tweak it. And then the last one is the packaging. Packaging really matters to me. I've had the privilege of working with 2 terrific designers. One is Dave Reis Jr.,
Yes.
who has done great work and who generally the artists really love his work. And then Marion Rossoni in Providence also has done some excellent work for us and easy to work with, and the artists appreciate her. I know Dave Liebman has said to me, we've done several CDs with him, and made a statement something like, gee, I didn't think I'd have CDs that look this good.
Yes. Yeah. The product is good.
He really appreciated the work. So again, what I didn't want to happen is that CD would come on and someone sitting out there, again, I think in terms of radio, but that's dated.
Yep.
But they would say, why are they playing this? In other words, the quality isn't there.
Yeah.
And so I always set my sights very, very high in terms of quality.
Yeah, that's like when people want to know about jazz, introduced me to jazz, some of my friends, and I was careful who I took them to see for the first time. You know, like if a guy never saw jazz before, you don't want him to see Coltrane.
Yeah.
You want to see Errol Garner, and then like jazz, and then he grow into it. And that's why, like, I call them the jazz police. A lot of people used to knock smooth jazz. I didn't buy smooth jazz, but to me, it was an introduction. Somebody might have bought a smooth jazz and say, I'm going to listen to some more jazz. You know, I used some friends of mine who call it, make fun. I say, yeah, the jazz police. But yeah, if it sounds good, it sounds good. You know?
Right, and people have their taste.
Yeah, right. Even a lot of jazz, like I said, the word jazz covers too much. There's a lot of things that are called jazz I can't listen to. You know? Yeah.
So it has been a great ride. It's been wonderful getting to know the musicians. Most of them are appreciative.
Yeah. Oh, they should be.
We do.
Yeah. What I thought was great was when you have the artist recording, and then you'd have an event in the Warm Sutter Club with them just before they recorded. It was like they
like
warmed up.
Yeah,
they warmed up together.
People at the WUMD Sutter have been great to us.
And
also.
and it was great for us, the audience. You know, we get to see these guys. Yeah, Warm Sutter Club. I did a South Coast Learning Network. I did a thing there. 5 weeks it would be, and I call it Let's Talk Jazz. And I'd have the people come in, bring their CDs, and we talk about the artists and all that. It was right there at the Warm Sutter Club.
Educating, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we, particularly with John Stein, guitarist who lives in Boston and now Tiverton part-time.
Yes.
We had a regular thing going where he had his drummer lived in Brazil.
Yes.
And about every year or every other year, he would get an invitation to like a high school, a prep school in Boston to be artist in residence for a week or two. So they would fly him up. And what we do is they do a little rehearsing or talking about songs. John would write some new material, and the WUMD became the rehearsal of the new material. And then that weekend they would go into the studio and record. And then a year later, when he came back, we would do the CD release at the WUMD, but also mix in new material. And then if that was a Thursday night, maybe Saturday, they would go into the studio and record the new CD. So we had it was almost like not a production line, but it was a pattern.
It was a system.
Yeah, a system.
Yeah.
You got to do live material. You got to do a CD release, but also work on the new material, get a reaction to it, and then go in a little better rehearsed to the studio. And Zé Eduardo Nazario is the Brazilian drummer.
Right. He was good.
He was
amazing. The things he did with the drums were different.
Yeah, he very talented guy, and it was a big influence, I know, from John on the arrangements, and he added a lot to how the CDs finally came out.
Yeah,
he was instrumental.
So we're fortunate, and unfortunately for New York and New Hampshire, we got you here in New Bedford. you came by. Tell us about that. Tell us about that.
The person I was married to at the time grew up in South Dartmouth. Unfortunately, she passed away after a fairly long illness. But my line was that our life together was a series of moves closer to her mother, who lived in South Dartmouth, and we ended up living around the corner from her mother. And she got very sick and moved in with her mother. Her mother had retired from St. Luke's Hospital and cared for her in her later years. And I had 2 young children, and my job was to take care of them. But one of the first experiences I had when I came to the area, even before I lived here, was my wife at the time, her name was Martha. One of her friends in South Dartmouth was getting married in their yard, in her parents' house, and they had a jazz group.
Wow!
I don't know, the piano player was an older man, a little heavy set, but there was an alto player.
Yeah.
And I'm listening and thinking, God, this guy is good.
Yeah.
This was the real deal. This one, I'm disparaging about wedding bands, and I shouldn't be, because they're great players generally. They're top players, and that's how they make a living.
They got to make a living. Yes, I was just going to say.
It was Bobby Green, and I went up to him, and of course, showing off, I said, "Oh, do you do any monk tunes?"
Yeah.
So they did. I don't know if they did Blue Monk or whatever. But we chatted a little bit, and then after that, I heard on the radio on WUSM someone named B. Green. He would say, he never said Bobby Green.
Yes.
And I thought, is this the same guy? I don't know. It probably is. He never once said, this is Bobby Green. He says, B. Green.
Yeah.
And that was Music for Sunday, which you did for how many years?
26. And that's how I got there. When Bobby started, he asked me to come on right at the beginning there. But my kids were small, and I was working. I said, Bobby, I can't do my Sundays, and my Sundays, weekends, I couldn't. So anyway, he had asked me to come on as a guest, which I never did. But anyway, when he passed away, Gloria Clark met my wife at Shaw's. She said, can I have your phone number? She called me up. She said, Bobby always wanted you to be on the radio. He passed away. Now we need you. So because of Gloria, I went on. Wow. And it lasted 26 years. And what I found out about the radio is why I appreciate playing jazz again. What I really found out is that people are shut in. They can't get out, and they just look forward to that program. In fact, some of them older jazz fans, and they call. I'd have to give them my phone number because I'm on the radio and they want to talk about jazz, and I talk. And then that's when I appreciate the radio more. It means a lot to meant a lot to some people.
For some people, it's
ill people
to the outside world.
Exactly. So,
Yeah,
in
that's
fact,
very true.
there was one, and it shows what a benefactor you are. There was one. He was an ex-musician. He called me. He was from Fall River, and he couldn't get out, but he called me, wanted to talk about jazz, and I told you about him. And well, actually, I did meet him because he told me on Tuesdays he would go to Savers because senior he'd walk over from his house. So I went one day and I surprised him. I asked the people, but I won't say his name. So and so, that's him over there. And I told you about him. You sent him a box of CDs.
Yeah. No,
That's a kind of yeah. But that's what I learned about radio too. I appreciated even more what I could help.
No, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's gone. But anyway, so. I talk about memories. I remember on Spring Street, you had a little office on Spring Street, and we standing in front of there one day. I always think about this when I see Wellness City Sound. You said, Dave, you were going to start Fiber Optics. If I'm successful with this, I'm going to have a CD company. And you did.
Yeah, it goes back actually to high school.
Yeah.
I wanted to be an A&R man.
Yeah.
Today, a lot of people don't quite know that expression. I feel it. It's artist and repertoire.
Yeah.
A&R man was like the producer of the CD.
Yeah.
Or in those days, records.
Yes.
Or the session. And he chose the songs, he chose the musicians, put things together, got the arrangers.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that. So when I was looking at colleges in high school, I had originally been a math science student, but some teachers had a very funny way of doing things, and it upset me. I always say I don't act, I react.
Right.
So I see something I don't like, and I run in the other direction.
Right.
I don't take forward steps.
Right.
I run away. So I didn't like math anymore, but I thought about going to, there was a school, I don't know if it still exists, the RCA Institute in New York City. Mm-hmm. And it would teach you engineering and acoustics and electronics. Mm-hmm. So I got the catalog and I thought about applying to school there, and it was all math. So I decided against it. But, so I've always, again, been a jazz fan, collected records. And then in the late 90s, the fiber optics business was doing very, very well. I always quote a competitor of mine who said there was a 3-month period when I thought I was rich. Yeah. And that happened to coincide with this New Year's Eve. Yeah. And I thought I could spend the money. And I over the years, did spend quite a bit of money. I think about what I paid for some of the early CDs. Well, I shouldn't, I paid a lot for some of the later CDs too. But again, it's been very fulfilling to be able to do that.
You just helped me out when I was saying about Joe Beck and Miles. It was the AR&R man. Then Miles didn't want it anymore.
Right.
That's what it was. Yeah, right. You just brought that up. Yeah. So, I remember that time. That was when we were on the South Coast, not the South Coast, New Bedford Committee for Music.
Yeah,
it was after one of the meetings.
It was Bobby was on it originally, and then when he passed away, it continued, and we would do. You and I were on the committee.
Yeah, I came on after Bobby passed away. Eddie Stack asked me to come on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And Bobby had been on before. Yeah, briefly.
And Herbie.
Yeah, Herbie King, great drummer.
Herbie, one of my favorites at times. The things that he was creative. He was a creative drummer. I remember one time seeing him playing Night in Tunisia, and he took his solo with the brushes on Night in Tunisia. Night in Tunisia. He was very creative. Yeah. We've had such great musicians come through the city of New Bedford. Like when I talked about your wall, I said we have 6 musicians up there, 3 from New Bedford, 3 not from New Bedford. They came to New Bedford and stayed.
Yeah, it's a great tradition. And to me, there's no question in my mind that what I do with Whaling City Sound is possible because of this tradition, that the music is here, and I'm just building on what what's in front of me.
Right. But it was great that you did do that.
Well,
that's the thing. That's what I appreciate. You did bring it out.
What I say is that we need to make the audience self-conscious. But I don't use that word the way most people do, the common meaning. I mean it in a literal sense. We have to make the audience conscious of the people around them.
That's right.
People together at the WUMD or any way you can. and let them look around and say, oh, all these people like jazz too? Or, oh, this, there must be something happening here.
Right.
So we have a great audience. I talk about that to the musicians when I bring someone into town. I say, you're really going to like the audience. And as you know, for a musician, they feed on what they get back from the audience.
Oh,
So,
yes,
you go to a
yes.
small place like the Wamsutta, a room, and you have people who are not talking. They're clapping hard after. They're going up to you up to the musicians and saying, this was a very enjoyable night. We'll have to see you again. And it means something as opposed to just, playing and having no response, not getting
exactly,
anything back.
exactly. And that's like the old days when the clubs and all, the audience and the musicians started interacting with the audience.
Yep.
There were like certain musicians, they know like a certain song, or you came in, you while in the solo, they go to that. And because they recognize you coming in, they'd recognize the audience. There was interaction.
Yeah.
There was interaction. Yeah.
And we have just great performers around.
Oh, man,
People
we've
always,
had so many.
People say, oh, why does New Bedford have such a great jazz tradition and all that? My own feeling is that, yes, we do have that, but everywhere does.
Right.
That if I was into country music, New Bedford would be
Yeah.
would have enough country music performers that this could be that could be a big deal.
Yes.
I know that certainly the Z has sold out performances for country musicians, even though it doesn't seem like they have them that often. But whatever style of music you're into, hip hop,
exactly,
Irish music. This was a great Johnny Cunningham was a world class fiddler and Celtic music superstar. Passed away, but so there's every kind of music in the area, but you got to dig it up.
Cape Verde music. In fact, I'm gonna do one podcast about Cape Verde music, older Cape Verde music. They feel Cesare Rivera, she used to come here and sing. Vet the vets, they had to bring her in. And I remember, forget one time they had to pay her $75 before she was famous. And she was singing the Modern. And one day a guy in Paris played a record and the phones just kept ringing so much, he called them. And that's how she became famous, by this guy playing one of those. But Cape Verde music was a big. But a lot of the jazz musicians were also played Cape Verde at the same time, for work too,
Right.
But yeah. So New Bedford is a community that loves music of all types. Yeah.
And then again, the years when I first came to the area, the mid '80s, I would try and go down to the Ultramarine Band Club.
Right, that's where it started.
What's the social club? What's the other one?
There was United Social. There was a West End Social up the West End. There was United Social, and Bobby Green used to play an altar.
Near the Ultramarine. What was the band club?
Bomb Shelter.
Yeah, that was a nightclub. This is more of the halls.
Let's see, the Gaylord Club. Would it be that one?
I don't think.
I don't know. It was near the band club. Near the band club.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I think so. Anyway, they would have jazz sometimes. Sometimes it would be pop.
Yeah. Well, the Verdi and Vets Hall.
Verdi and Vets.
That's the one. That's the one.
That's right.
Yeah.
I found it to be on Saturday night a very, very welcoming place.
Yeah.
My expression at the time was a Cape Verdean bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
And what I meant by that was there was a real family feeling.
Oh, yeah.
People would dress up.
Yep.
The men had suits on and ties. And
we were dressed up.
Very well dressed.
All dressed up.
And you walk in and people would just hug each other and like they hadn't seen each other in a little while. And just a real warmth.
Well, that's why with Piccadilly, guys, in fact, I'd be in New York with Joe and Paul, just hanging out, and guys would say, where are you from? New Bedford, man, I got to get a gig deal. I got to get another gig that I heard about. Because what happened with the Caribbean, they'd play at first, that was the Eastern Star Temple before the Verdi and Vets bought that building, and it had been closed. The Eastern Star wasn't. So they would bring bands in there, and there was a promoter, Baron Grace, and he did all of New England. Bring the big names, Cat Anderson, Duke Ellington, all the big names played in that, because at those days he would rent a hall for the night, one night stands. So and then the Verdi and Vets bought it, But yeah, there was all. So what they liked was too is so when we play, like you said, everybody's all dressed up. But there was a club. It was a private a building next to the bank club. That's why I mentioned it when you were asking. And Gaylords, they called themselves the Gaylords. And late at night, after the guy finished a gig at Piccadilly, at 2:00 in the morning, they'd be gigging there. The guys would be feeding, and people would go from there. And then the people would invite up at the house to eat. In fact, one Christmas, the first Christmas, my wife and I when we got married, our first Christmas in our apartment, there was a trio playing in the Piccadilly. So we decided to invite them over for Christmas. So my wife worked for the president of the musician union. She worked for him in the veterans department, but he was the president. So he asked my wife, she told him, she said, yeah. She said, well, why don't you ask them if they'll play at the House of Correction? I'll pay for you, pay for it. I'll go. So after my wife cooked, I go with him and the trio, and we're walking down where they got it set up, and I came in, Reis, hey, Reis. The piano player says, are your friends in jail? But that's how it was. We brought them into the houses and all that stuff, so they enjoyed coming to New Bedford. You're playing.
Yeah. No.
Whenever I was in New York, I mentioned New Bedford. They would as soon as I got to get another gig there, or I want a gig there. Yeah. But it was a community thing too.
It is.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we've done for more than 20 years, I think it will be next year or this year, it'll be 25 years. Aha Nights began.
I was going to mention that. I want to make sure people know that.
The first one was actually in our parking lot on Center Street, and the band Grace Potter. She was a young lady, I think might have still been in high school or very young, from Waitsfield, Vermont. And was very soulful, had a real Ray Charles, believe it or not, feel. Very soulful piano player and guitar, bass, and drums. And she did the first one. And after that, we did June, July, August, September, missing very few nights. Mostly jazz, not always jazz, in the parking lot. And we'll do that again this year.
Yeah.
I'm still in the process of booking it, so I don't have it all worked out yet. But so, and we start at 5:30. And we usually stay outside in the parking lot, and we have a few chairs. People bring their own chairs, and we have a regular crowd. We try to start on time at 5:30. And then we go till 8:30, depending on how many people are there. Some nights, I say it's a good night if there are more people in the audience than in the band. Some nights we haven't had that many people.
Yes.
And other times, we've had a great crowd, and we have regulars who show up and stay the whole night, like you.
Yeah. I've been to all of them. It's funny, though, last year, I missed the first set because I parked by the Whalen Museum, and Mike Rocha and the guys were playing, and they're all waving, so I couldn't walk it out the upland. So I sat there for the first set, then I walked out
I
the
have some
upland.
funny stories about that, too.
Yeah.
Where you park your car somewhere, and you look in the window, and it's musicians that you know, but that's not where I want to go.
That's like,
I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they, waiting me to come in.
Yeah.
So I have to go in, and I'm late for the people who were expecting me.
Another time I was walking down, it was a couple of years ago, and they were marching around, stop and play. So I listened a little bit. So I left to walk down their place. He marched all the way behind me right down to their place. Yeah, Mike's a good guy, really. Well, Neal, this was really good. We could go on forever, Anything else you want to cover? Please, please don't leave anything out, please.
Yeah, Fernando Huergo, as the next release, it's called Resilience, and it's a big band. It's his own compositions, and his partner, Yulia, I don't remember her last name. I have trouble with it. I'm sorry about that. I apologize.
Yeah. No, I'm bad with names.
She did it. She's a flute player, a fantastic flute player, and it is a big band. And it's again familiar, kind of arranging a little bit, but it's unusual to have a flute instead of lead alto.
Right.
Big band. Usually, the lead alto is the guy who drives the horn section.
Yeah.
And you have a lead trumpet, you have a lead trombone.
Yeah.
But there is, throughout a lot of this CD, there in that sax section, there's a very strong flute. So it is a slightly different, and it's a Latin jazz big band. The drummer, I can never remember his name, very young guy, a student of Mark Walker. The drummer is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Fernando Huergo's playing, I've always loved.
Yes.
Very few electric bass players.
Right.
That just the ones that get to me in a very big way.
Yeah. Yeah. Ginny Shea has it. I just looked at it on Ginny Shea's today
Great
about that.
cover, I think.
Yes.
Dave Arruda. I don't know if he did the painting or the cover or whether he just designed it. I have to find that out. But it's kind of a striking cover.
Yeah, I was just looking at it before I left on the computer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
just
good job.
announced that. And as a matter of fact, I got an email from a woman who does jazz in England, Ruth Fisher. Just a single line, something like another killer CD from you guys, whatever. So she's real excited about it. So I think that will get some attention. And then again, Terry Gibbs Dream Band in October. And then I have a recording done at the Whaling Museum from 7 years ago.
Oh, I remember that. I remember.
But it's being finalized, and I would say second half of this year that should come out. That's a lot of funk. I say jazz guys playing funk and R&B, but it's the regulars. Two drummers, Pete Antunes and Marty Richards.
Oh.
Bill Miele, late Bill Miele on bass. Actually, this past, I think it was Wednesday, it was a year since Bill Miele.
Yeah, I know.
Guitar player was Jim Robitaille, but on a few tracks, Mark T. Small plays blues guitar, and Marcus Montero and Dino Gavoni on saxophone.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, but you're right. Innovative music, impeccable sound. That's so true.
The sound part is hard because you have the recording, and then you get different opinions about the mixing.
Oh, yeah.
You can mix forever. You could mix.
See, that's what people don't know. They don't just go in the record studio, play the tunes, and leave. And make it.
They think you just record it.
Yes.
No. You spend hours
exactly
tweaking, and then the next guy comes along and says, "Well, that's a little bit loud. You can drop the bass a little." But trying to get the sound to be as good as the music. That's the way I express it. Your playing was fantastic. Our job is to
finishing.
Try to make the sound be as good a level as what you played.
Right.
That's not always easy to do.
No, I can imagine. And you can't please everybody.
Well, that's true.
That's the thing, Everybody has to.
And also, money's not unlimited. So a lot of recordings, you have to just say, well, I can't afford to go in another day in the studio.
That's the thing,
And I turned down CDs early on that were close to being done, but they needed another day. They needed more rehearsal or something needed fixing. And I
there's a limit.
said no, But again, like everything else.
So do you want to announce the tracks that will be on here?
I haven't quite picked out.
We'll do that later. We'll do that later.
Terry Gibbs
when it's
band
done.
live recording of. I'll take a check here. Of Sweet Georgia Brown.
Okay.
And again, the reason I picked that is I know this arrangement by heart. I had this record, and then to go hear it live when Jerry put this big band together, and to listen to at the beginning, the band members struggled to get it right.
Yes.
And then by the end of the 4 days, they had it down. But that I thought was a great arrangement. And I don't remember now who I'll have to look up who was the arranger. And then Greg Abate and Phil Woods with Talking by Phil Woods. We're not going to be playing the music.
No.
Sean Montero, A Story by Clark Terry. Where, again, he was a character. He was an entertainer. That's the other thing we could have talked about is some jazz musicians just play music.
Yeah.
And others, there's a long tradition. Lionel Hampton, Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
They're Dizzy Gillespie.
Yeah.
They're entertainers. You go out to hear them, you'll hear great music, but they'll also tell stories. They're funny.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love when, excuse me, Michael Joel of Metro Pop, when they moved to New York. And as a kid, I wasn't going to listen to jazz, just go to New York and hang out. But during the day, they'd go to the Union Hall, and guys would get the get their pays, and then they go sit in this place. And that's what I love, the stories they tell, the teasing they did. Or just tease each other.
That's
names.
true.
I just would sit there. And so my uncle didn't realize, you know what I'm saying? So years later, before he passed away, he moved back to Rhode Island. He moved to Rhode Island and I'd go up meet him every Friday, and I stopped bringing these things up. He'd say, "We didn't know you were paying attention."
No, your experience is unique, I think.
Yeah,
your jazz experience and growing up.
I didn't really realize that I was growing. They were like, before they moved, they were like my babysitters because everybody was at work. I was the only kid, first grandchild, nephew. Everybody was at work. So they would take me along with them. And in fact, I thought I was bored. But I remember everything. I remember everything when I would bring them up. He said, we didn't know you were paying attention.
Yeah, no, to grow up in a household where living down the hall was Paul Gonsalves.
Yeah, he lived in my grandmother's house. See, what happened, he was from Pawtucket. And Joe, when they were teenagers, Paul came with his father and his brothers to play. They used to have a Sunday contest, and they played Cape Verdean music on the guitar. And they were teenagers, and Joe had a little band, and he and his friends, and they had a guitar, but they played jazz. And Paul and his brothers would win every week, they say. And so when Joe lost his guitar player, and he asked Paul, "Would you play with us?" Paul said, "Yeah." So what happened, he would stay at my grandmother's house and with Joe. And then one day he asked him, "Can I go home and get my sax?" They didn't even know he played sax. And then he brought the sax, and that was it. He didn't play guitar much anymore.
That's amazing. And I don't know if it's clear, but Joe is Joe Livramento.
Oh, yes, Joe Livramento. Yes, he played. He and Phil Barboza, who was the band leader for these guys in Boston, he brought the guys from the band, and the guys from Boston were in the band. And in fact, Chick Corea, just reading Chick Corea, said, I learned how to play. My father was a musician, and I learned how to play in Boston with a Portuguese band, Phil Barboza, the Latin music. Yeah, wow. Yeah. Tom Mickelson sent me that, in fact. Yeah. So I was a kid they carried around, and I was absorbing all that, didn't even realize it. Then I got to,
Going back, we began a little bit talking about the jazz wall. I got to mention something. Lee Blake, who wrote the original grant and has really changed the city, I would say.
Oh, yeah,
Lee Blake has had a tremendous influence, amazing person. But the New Bedford Historical Society has been working on walking tours and things, but as they have someone that they're working with doing AI, where if you get an app on your phone and you can go up to the new Frederick Douglass statue and he'll talk to you.
Oh, wow.
So they're going to do that with the jazz wall. There's going to be a QR code or something there, or something you can type in, and the musicians on the wall will talk to you.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing, man. Amazing. Yeah. How'd you get the idea for the wall?
I don't think it was my idea. I think someone said it to me. It's a 5-story wall. It has a pointed roof, but it's 5 stories high, and it's all just cement. It was just cement, in pretty good shape. And someone just in passing said, you ought to do a mural here of jazz musicians. Yeah. And people credit me with the idea, but I don't think it was me. But when I mentioned it to Lee just made it happen.
Right. Okay.
But the biggest thing, you and I spent a lot of time talking about this, is we decided it would have to be deceased musicians because there were just too many. We couldn't. We didn't want to get into arguments with people about how long there. Right. And so I reached out to a bunch of people, and I know Lee Blake said she had some women she wanted to put up there, but they were all alive.
Oh, wow. Good for them.
Yeah, it is. But so they didn't make it. But anyway, we narrowed it down to 6. We're a little bit limited to do justice, but Kat Knudsen, as you mentioned, did a fabulous job. It came out way better than I dreamed. I saw early drawings, which were good. But
she did a fabulous job.
It pops. There are some very funny things, like little faces on Herbie's cymbal.
Yes.
And faces on the buttons on, I'm trying to think of whose sport jacket it is, right in the middle. Maybe it's Armstead. I'm not sure.
Probably Armstead. He was in the middle.
So if you, it was up there for a few months before I noticed even these ones, but she had fun with it. She was enjoying herself and amusing herself while when they did that, that summer, I guess it maybe 21, 22. It was during COVID, and they would be out there all night. If they thought it was going to rain the next day, they would work through the night with a lift, and she had a small crew, and they worked almost round the clock at times, and weather, but it was 100 degrees out or close at times.
Yeah. I'll let people know I said it before, but Kat has a podcast. You can check her podcast out here.
Oh, okay.
on here, yeah. I remember walking by there just looking, and Mike Rocha would be there. He'd have another guy, and they'd be playing for her while she was painting. Mike.
That is
he was there. Well, Neal, this was really, really good, and we could go on forever.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll make 2 shows.
Another 24 hours.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Yeah. So thanks again. Thank you very much. And thanks for what you know.
And thanks to the audience for being great.
Right. And thank you for what you've done for us here. And let me make this clear. It's not only jazz. Neal's been a benefactor for all arts, symphony and everything. It's not just jazz. He just helps New Bedford. I sincerely mean that.
I'm blessed. And I'm blessed to be able to share some of this.
Yeah. And you proved that when you mentioned Lee Blake, her group. You just proved what I'm saying. You mentioned all these groups. I know what you do.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
We have great people around here.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you. All right, you take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fiber Optic Center's Jazz Podcast Series with your host, Dave Reis. Please go to theartistindex.com for more information about the Fiber Optic Center, Dave Reis, or this 10-part jazz podcast series.